kindness guys. You know, they
Hope
find
they
places.
didn't get towed. Well, obviously we have a lot of Joe Bob fans here. So before I go into my questions, I want to open it up for some of you to make sure we get to as many as possible. So is there anybody that has any questions? Yes, sir.
So, is it true that the reason why you're back for the new show, why it all started, was because of Darcy?
Is it true that I'm back because of Darcy? Yes and no. I mean, I had met Darcy. Darcy came to a signing, a book signing that I did. And so I met her at the time that the producers came to me who said they wanted to do a show with me. The guys who produced the show today. So I had lunch with them, but I have to say this was about the 30th lunch that I'd had with people who said they wanted to do a show with me. You know, since in the intervening 17 years, you know. And so I just regarded it as a way to get lunch. And they said, well, we want to pitch you to this new service, Shudder. And I said, fine. I had said yes to everybody in the past 17 years. And so lo and behold, 6 or 8 weeks later, the Shudder executive shows up, and we go to lunch with him. And he says he wants to, you know, do some kind of show, and he basically said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, if we're going to do, you know, one show, it should probably be something big. We should do like a marathon." And originally we planned to do a 54-week marathon. And so Darcy and I had become friends, and I told her, you know, I'm going to do this one-time show. And because, you know, it's probably the last time I'll do it, because they want to do the exact same show that from Monster Vision. And one thing that every agent and manager will tell you about TV is never repeat. Never repeat. That's why when Andy Griffith's sitcom was over, he did a 1-hour drama. He didn't go back to do another sitcom. It's like, and so that was the rule for years and years and years. In television, you just do not repeat the same format because people want something new. And so I said, you know, I don't know if I should even do this, because they didn't have any money, and right at the last minute they cut all the money. They didn't even have any money to. They didn't really have enough money to do a double feature, much less a 54-hour marathon. And so I was not going to do it. You know, it just seemed stupid to go on and do a double feature, and no one was ever going to see that and anything. And Darcy encouraged me to do it, and they called me. We'd actually decided to say no to them. And that was on a Friday. And they called me on a Monday, and they said, well, the whole crew will work for free, or for bus fare, or whatever. And I said, well, fuck! You know, now I have to write it, you know? Now I have to do it. And so we did it. We went to this, one of the worst parts of Newark, New Jersey, where they have a warehouse where that tattoo show is filmed. What's the
Ink Master.
Ink Master. Ink Master has their own studio in the slums of Newark, and they gave us one little room at the back, you know, that we could use to do. I said, well, you know, you're pushing me to do this. You want to be the mail girl? And she said yes. And then I found out later you were going to run away. You didn't even want to do you got scared. You didn't even want to do the show. Okay, but anyway, I think she just admitted it. So anyway, we did the marathon, and that's So here we are.
And you broke the internet, right?
Well, yeah, which is something else Darcy explained to me, because at the time I didn't understand what was going on, and I
We
said,
need you, Darcy. Come on over here.
because I said, because she was like, hey, everything crashed. All the servers crashed. And it wasn't just Shudder, it was AMC servers crashed and the IFC network server. It's like all these servers for these TV networks crashed.
Awesome.
And I said, what does that mean? And she said, nobody can get on. Nobody can get on. Just have that thing circling on your screen. You can't get on. And I said, so nobody can see the show. And she says, right. And I said, so this is bad. And she says, no, this is good. I was like, well, I kind of want people to be able to see the show. And she's like, no, it doesn't matter. This is better than people seeing the show. And I was like, I really worked hard. I would like people to actually see the show. And it's like, no, it's a good thing that they can't see the show. And so I was very confused that night. And eventually some of the people got on in like the 10th hour, or some of the people got on as early as like the third movie. But the whole setup for the whole thing was the intro to the first movie. And then the second movie was Sleepaway Camp, which I thought was a killer,
Yeah.
And then the third, fourth, fifth movies, those were programmed to be on at 4 a.m. when nobody's watching. And so the people are tuning in at the time that it sucks. So anyway, so it was a weird way to start. And I have to hand it to these guys, Austin Jennings, the director, Matt Mangiarides, the producer. I said this will be the third time I've done this exact same format. And they were like, right. And so I've done the same show basically my whole life.
Yeah. And that's something else I wanted to ask. Well, first of all, I want to say, I remember hearing Darcy on the Radio 8 Ball podcast years ago. Yeah. And she talked about how she came into this whole thing, which was amazing, and you kind of touched on that as
Radio
well.
8 Ball is the guy from Slimeball Bolorama, right?
Mm-hmm. And Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4, the Andras Jones
Yeah,
podcast.
Andras Jones.
If you like music, go check it out. It's really amazing. But yeah, Miss Darcy was on a very early episode. But yeah, so this show has had so many years. I started watching on TMC when I was just...
You started watching on the movie channel? Oh, wow. You're not old enough. How old were you, 3?
About that. maybe like 7.
Your parents just didn't give a damn, did they?
I started watching horror when I was 8 years old, and I never stopped.
Oh.
Yeah. Thank you. My husband's sitting right there. He'll tell you that.
But we didn't just have horror. We had all those European sex comedies.
Yes, my mom wouldn't let me watch those, but she had no problem with blood.
They would not let
She
you
was
watch
fine
it.
with the blood.
They call them.
Erotic thrillers.
There was actually very little sex and very little comedy in them, but there was a lot of nudity in them.
Yes.
And so we would play these movies like She's 19 and Ready. No matter, it was horrible. It was just this horrible West German sex comedy back when Germany was 2 countries. It was this. They called it a West German sex comedy, and it was terrible. And the lead actress was not 19, she was 40. And no matter how many times we showed it, and everyone already knew how horrible it was, it would get this huge rating. And so they would put it back on the schedule. And I would say, I'm not hosting She's 19 and Ready again. And they would say, yes, you are. Here it is, October 19th, She's 19 and Ready. So we had all these films that like nobody else ever saw. Except on that one show.
Obviously, they had a love for those films and a fan base for those films. And I remember hearing you say once that the only sin a film can have is if it bores you. So obviously that did not bore people. They loved it.
Right.
Or they want to keep it going.
Wild in Ibiza. That was another one.
Yeah, so how did the evolution happen between the TMC and the TNT and then now the Shudder?
Well, the movie channel I don't know. Does anybody have the movie channel? Does anybody still watch the movie channel?
Anyone have cable anymore?
One person. One person. Well, in the 80s, if you know, back when you had your basic cable and then you paid for premium channels, that's basically the two choices you had. Is you didn't have all these tiers and everything, and they were usually $10. In most cities, they were $10. So HBO was $10, and then if that wasn't enough movies for you, you get Showtime. It's $10, and then the third one was Cinemax. That was another $10. And then if you still didn't have enough movies in your life and on premium channels, the fourth one was the movie channel. Yeah. So we were like at the end of this. If you were subscribing to the movie channel, you had already spent $40 on movies. So you were a true hardcore movie fan, which is, it kind of like, I didn't understand this because we had a lot of people in prisons who were watching, and I thought, how does the prison pay for? First of all, how does the warden allow you to have premium cable in your cell? And then how can they afford to buy all these channels? Anyway, we would get all this prison mail. We actually started a segment of prison mail on the show, and so that show ran because they didn't pay much attention to it. It was at Showtime Networks. It was the second channel at Showtime Networks. I was the least important show there, so they didn't pay much attention to it. So we're on 52 weeks a year, two features a week. Sometimes we would do specials, and so we could just do whatever we wanted to do. And so it ran 11 years, and they changed format. The only reason they got rid of it, they still liked me, when they thought about me. But the only reason they changed is they changed the whole format of the network. It became something else. I don't remember what it was, but anyway, the marketing message became different. And so there were two programmers at TNT who were fans of the show, and Monster Vision already existed. They just had different guest hosts. And they said, hey, you want to come over and do a show here? We have this show called Monster Vision. We need a host for it. And I said, yeah, what do you want to do? What kind of show is it? Well, we just do exactly your show. Just exactly that same show. You know, so same thing that happened with Shudder. And so I think I was off the air like 2 months. And I said, oh, and I've got all the sets. It's like we used the same sets, you know, the same sets that were built in Spanish Harlem in 1986. We're still the sets being used on the. I mean, we would add things to them. You know, it's still the same sets on TNT. So same thing at TNT. They didn't really give a shit about stuff that was on that late at night, and so we didn't have to be on any given length of time. We could start at 11 o'clock. We could be, as long as we were done by 6 a.m., they didn't care what we did. And so the segments could be any length. You know, they could be short, they could be long. We didn't have any time limitations. And so we just did whatever we wanted to do. And occasionally the viewers, usually viewers who were not used to watching the show, would get upset about something. And that's the only time they would pay attention to us. And they would tell us, don't do that. Why did you do that? Because they hadn't watched it. You know,
then they'd have to go back and watch
the bosses
it.
never watched the show.
Yeah.
And then the same thing happened. They changed formats. They said, we want to be female friendly. And they have statistics of how many males and females watch your show. And mine were bad for female friendly. They were like 65% male, and nobody goes that high. You know, it's like, that's really, really high for TV. It's just like way too male. Now, partly that's because at the time, horror films there was a larger male audience than female audience. That's changed radically over the past 20 years. But at the time, the kind of movies we were showing, exploitation films, had an overwhelmingly male audience. So they actually gave me a chance. They created this thing called Hollywood Saturday Night that I hosted, where we actually went to LA, and I mean, I ended up hosting stuff like Look Who's Talking To. And it just never quite gelled. You know, it just never quite worked. And so finally it was like, okay, we're going female friendly. We're buying every season of ER. And, and so that's when it became, you know, whatever their slogan is now, we know drama, or did they get rid of that? Maybe
I haven't watched it in a while.
It used to be we know drama,
Yeah.
you know, and so it was like they kept. They should have moved me over to TBS, because TBS was still like really sports oriented, and you know, it was like. But anyway, so that was the end of that, and then I went back to writing, which is my first profession. That's what I do, you know. And I just wrote for everybody for a long time. I wrote some books, and once a year I'd have these meetings where they would ask me, "Hey, you want to come back and do a show?" And I would say yes, and then they would never do the show.
I love that story. I've always wondered how that happened, the evolution of it all. Okay, more questions. Anyone?
Why do you think it worked out a lot better here on Shudder? Or
Why do I think it worked out better on Shudder? Because, well, a couple things. One, if you're subscribing to Shudder, you're pretty hardcore. I mean, it's like nothing is gonna. You're not gonna get upset because there was too much gore and street trash. You might not like street trash, but you know, it's not the gore that's gonna bother you. And there was a change in the culture over the past 20 years. Horror became mainstream. And it became possible for professors at Harvard to like horror. And you would be surprised at how many professors email me. And there are now professors of horror. I mean, they may not call them that, but there are professors and academics who write, you know, book-length treatments of various directors who, when I first started reviewing these movies, you know, those directors would have been considered the scum of the earth. And in fact, when I first started reviewing the movies, you know, even before I was on TV, they were considered not suitable for a family newspaper. You know, you just didn't review those movies. They were just not reviewed. And so people don't even remember that time now, because today, if anything, any movie that comes out has 100 reviews on the internet the next day. You know, so people don't realize what a huge change it was. It's like, I don't think anybody even noticed. I was like going around saying, hey, Shape of Water won the fucking Academy Award. And then it was like, yeah, so what? And I was like, a rubber suit creature movie, a horror film, won the fucking Academy Award. It's like, and nobody thought it was that big a deal at the time. And I was like, this is huge. This is like a cultural sea change. This has never happened before. And, you know, like, I don't think anybody else thought it was that big.
Not only don't we win, we don't get nominated.
What?
Not only don't we win, we never even get nominated.
Yeah, I mean, they would always say, you know, has anything ever been nominated for? Has any horror film ever been nominated for an Academy Award? For decades, the answer was yes. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in 1932, and The Exorcist for technical nominations. That was it. That was it. There was absolutely no interest in horror by the Motion Picture Academy or by the people who voted for whoever votes. Who knows who votes? I mean, I think they wheel them in from Palm Springs and hook up their IVs and they vote. But anyway, that change, horror is a genre. It's no longer a subgenre or it became respectable.
Yes.
So I think that's why I was able to come back on TV, because it's sort of like if there aren't that many guys who've been following it that long. Forey Ackerman was dead. You know, so who are they going to get to come on and talk about it and curate it? You know, there aren't that many people.
Yeah. Wow.
There are now.
Yeah.
I mean, anything I ever write about or talk about on TV, I have to be really, 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 really careful because somebody is going to say that was not his fourth movie. You're ignoring the short film that he did in 1946. It's just like, everybody knows everything. Everybody knows more than me, you know. And so when I research these movies, I have to be really, really, really on the ball. Whereas when I first started talking about the movies on television, we would frequently have to call up the director, if we could even find the director, to find out anything on the background of the movie. You know, and so now it's like there's too much information, you know, and too much false information. And so you have to be really careful.
Yeah, when I'm giving fun facts, I'm always like, I read this on the internet. I don't know if it's true, but I read it. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And there's this thing that happens on the internet, which is the plausible false fact. Mm-hmm. It's something that sounds like it could probably be true, and then it gets repeated 500 times. Yeah. And so then it sort of becomes true whether you like it or not. Yeah. Yeah. So you have to be careful of that stuff.
Yeah. So you had a question? Yeah.
Favorite place that a horror movie was made that you've ever been to?
A horror movie?
Where a horror movie was made and you visited it. Because I know you went to the Sawyer House.
Have I ever been to places where they made horror movies?
What's your favorite one?
Oh, favorite one? Oh, well, that would have to be the, more than 20 years ago, I did an article on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre for Texas Monthly Magazine, and I interviewed every single person that worked on the movie, and I went to every single location. Probably the most amazing thing to me was they'd taken that house, which was on at the end of a dirt road in Round Rock, Texas, and they moved it to this little redneck tourist town on a lake about 100 miles to the west, and turned it into a restaurant. And at the time I wrote that article, the people at the restaurant didn't want anybody to know that it was the Texas Chainsaw Massacre House. Then they realized how lucrative it was to have a restaurant in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre House, and they started putting it on their website. Yes, this is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Yes, you can have dinner in the bone room. Yes, you can. But at the time I first visited there, they didn't want to see me. Boy, they didn't want to talk to me at all. Kingsland, Texas is where it is.
Yeah.
Grand Central Cafe.
The Grand Central Cafe.
Is that the name of it now?
That's what it is now.
I don't think it was at the time, but it's right across from the old rail station in Kingsland, Texas, which no one's ever heard of, but it's one of those places where you rent a place on the lake.
A friend of mine just went there and posted pictures on Instagram, and I said, I hate you right now. Like I want to go so badly, but I don't even know where it is.
Well, we did a little thing. We were working in Austin, and we went there and took some pictures and some. I think I did a video or something, and then we went to the gas station in Bastrop. You can stay overnight there. They have cabins out back. You know, the gas station scene in the Texas Chainsaw, the cemetery that's at the beginning of Texas Chainsaw. There's a lot of places like that that are sort of revered by Texas Chainsaw fans.
Yeah, exactly.
You can go to the Evil Dead site in Tennessee.
Oh, Tennessee.
They were shot in Tennessee, even though they were from Michigan.
Okay.
There's nothing there but a pile of bricks.
Yeah.
So, but people still go there, though.
I would. I'm just saying, I'm weird like that.
There's a lot of places in LA you can go. I mean, you can go to John Carpenter's shot half of his movies in various, South Pasadena, and I forget the little town that's like about 100 miles away. The Howling Seven, which was the worst movie we ever showed on Monster Vision, and it was so bad that it kind of became a cult, a minor cult thing at Monster Vision. We showed it 2 or 3 times because people got so interested in it because it was so bad. It killed the Howling franchise. I used to say it killed the Howling franchise, and then suddenly the Howling franchise came back. But I think they started over at number 1. It's like there was no Howling 8. So, but that's in a very interesting place called Pioneer Town, California, which was originally built in the middle of nowhere to make B westerns, and a lot of I think Tom Mix actually was there, but it was a cowboy place, and they have all these false fronts. Well, the Western died in the 50s, and they abandoned it. And the bikers moved in and took over these temporary buildings that were used for the movie sets, and it became this lawless town. And they made more than they weren't making the Westerns anymore. But occasionally somebody would show up with a camera, and that's what happened. This guy bought the rights to the Howling 7, which included footage from the Howling 6, 5, 4, and 3, and went to Pioneer Town and shot a whole alleged movie.
I think I've actually been to Pioneer Town when I was a kid. I'm from Bakersfield.
Yeah?
So I think that sounds really familiar.
I don't think you would forget it if you were there.
If it happened, it might have been Calico. If it happened, I was so young, but we used to take weird excursions like that. But yeah, so that sounds really familiar.
I'm trying to get Howling 7 for the new show.
Oh, that would be great.
Just because
And the new season premieres next week, is that right?
the season premiere is next Friday at 8 p.m. Central Time, and please try to watch the live feed because we get extra credit from the high sheriffs if you watch the live feed.
Y'all better do it.
So if you watch it, if you tune in at 8 o'clock on the thing that says Shutter TV at the top, because a lot of people never figure out that there is a live feed on Shutter. But you can watch Shutter for free if you just watch that part that says Shutter TV. But there's nothing ever good on there. but fortunately, we have that so we can do our premieres.
That's amazing. I love it. Any more questions?
Yes.
I was curious what your favorite of the Universal Monsters franchise. What's your favorite?
Favorite of the Universal Monsters, the movie or monster?
Monsters or what film in the series?
Probably either Bride of Frankenstein or Creature from the Black Lagoon. Does that count? Or
Absolutely.
The Spanish version of Dracula. Have you ever watched that?
Yes.
The guy who was the Spanish guy who was using the set in the middle of the night, after they finished with it on the regular one, was doing a much better job.
Are you more of a Hammer horror guy than the regular Universal?
If I had to choose between Universal and Hammer, I guess my taste would go more towards Hammer. I always go towards the lower budget overachiever type movie, but it depends on what you mean by Hammer. Darcy just wrote a massive article on Hammer, a primer for Hammer in the latest Fangoria. Check that out. But there was
Awesome.
As she pointed out in the article, there are several different periods of Hammer. It depends on what you mean by the Hammer films. I mean, in the 50s, it was one kind of Hammer film, and then in the early 60s, a different kind of Hammer film. In the early 70s, it was virtually all lesbian vampires. I mean, I don't know how many of those they made, a lot of them. And so there were all these different periods. I had a panel a few years back at Monster Mania, if any of you have ever been there, where we had all the Hammer girls came back, and we had them all lined up on the stage. And who was the one who starred in The Curse of Frankenstein? Who was the woman in that? She worked for Roger Corman, and I'm blanking on her name right now. Anyway, we had these. She was the oldest of the Hammer girls because she was in the very first movie. And so one by one, I went down the line and said, well, you know, these Hammer guys were kind of famous for being, you know, a little bit misogynist. Did you ever have any casting couch stories or anything? And everyone said, I was treated like a queen. I was treated so well. And we went down the line. And, oh no, they were wonderful. And we get to the last one, and I'm sorry that I can't remember her name right now.
Hazel Court.
Hazel Court. We get to Hazel Court, and they say, well, okay, so what about you, Hazel? And she turns and looks at the other women and says, what planet were you girls living on? Thank you, Hazel. So,
That's great.
What are some contemporary horror movies that left an impression on you or impacted you in a big way? Any favorites? Any favorite directors recently?
well, the most recent one that had a big impact on me was Invisible Man. I thought that was just terrific the way he did that. And then when I read the story of how, you know, of all the franchise deals they were handing out, that was the one they didn't really care about. And so I think that's the secret to what he was able to do is like, once again, he was the guy they weren't paying much attention to. And so he could sort of reshape the story the way he wanted to reshape it, and he wasn't going to get a lot of notes back. And so, because if you remember, they had this whole thing where, well, you know, they have the Marvel universe, we're going to do our universe. And the first couple of attempts at that were horrible, and it didn't work. And then when they're sort of giving up on it, they say, and yeah, you do the Invisible Man. And even though the numbers sound big to us, I think it was a $60 million movie. It wasn't the budgets that those other movies had. And what he was able to do with it, I thought, was just brilliant. And, you know, reinterpreting it for 2020 or 2018 or whenever it came out. And so that one had a big impact.
Anybody else? We have time for one or two more. In the back, orange shirt.
Do you recall your first drive-in movie?
My first drive-in movie would have been, I was in the back seat in my pajamas, and my parents drove the family to the drive-in. I mean, they tended to go to the big whatever the hot movie was of the day, and at the drive-in, you know, it was always a double feature, and so they would have the family movie would be at sundown, and then after the family movie they would have the adult movie, and so I would try to stay up for the adult. Now the adult movie would be like, I don't know, Wild Parties. you know, it wouldn't be very adult. It wouldn't be what we think of as adult. But anyway, I would try to stay up for it, and of course I would always fall asleep before I got to see the naughty comedy or whatever it was of the week. So I can't specifically remember the very first movie. It would have been some Hollywood blockbuster, I'm sure.
All right. Anyone else? No?
I have a question. Okay. Do you read horror? And if so, do you have a favorite author?
Do I read horror? I don't have time to read horror now. So I mostly read things that people highly recommend, you know, like really, really, really recommend. And I try to read. I'm trying to produce films, and so I try to read all the horror anthologies that come out every year, and most of them are not film material. But I'm reading them in a certain weird way because I'm looking for film material. I'm looking for stuff that has 3 acts, you know, no. So I don't have time. First of all, I'm trying to keep up with all these maniacs that are ready to jump on me because I got something wrong on the films, and it's like it seems like every time I get to a new film that I'm going to present on TV, there's more stuff about it. There's another book about it. There's another memoir about it. There's more stuff on the internet. There's new stuff all the time. It's like trying to keep up with Shakespeare scholarship or something. You know, I can't keep up. And so increasingly the burden of trying to be up to date on all this stuff is hard. It's hard.
Do you end up doing a lot of your own research for the movies that you're covering, or do you have help?
Yeah, because I don't trust the internet, and
Right.
so yeah, I research the movie extensively, just because that's what. But then, when I say that, 90% of the stuff that I find I don't use. I just use the stuff that's pertinent, you know, that's really matters to the movie, or is extremely salacious.
All right. All right, one more if we have one.
Is there a movie that you've ever wanted to show on any of your shows that's been like constantly rejected? Like you can't seem to get it through, maybe the show is too long, or the movie's too long, or the studios just don't want it to be aired?
Movies that we can't show?
Ones
That you've ever wanted to
maybe
get,
rejected.
that they just keep
Oh,
saying no.
there's a long list. There's a long list. Some of the studio libraries have in their legal agreement that you can't interrupt the movie. So those are all off limits. We can't even go there. Now we've had, through Darcy's intervention, through Darcy's hard work, Darcy found one of the lawyers who wrote that language, and he's agreed to make some exceptions for us. The reason they do that is they don't want you putting commercials in, you know. And so what we do is different. However, the language is there. We can't violate the language. So there's a lot of movies that are sort of off limits to us. Whereas when I was at Monster Vision, we could pretty much get whatever we wanted. Nobody wanted the movies that we wanted, you know. and the same thing at the movie channel. I mean, you know, but things have changed. It's like, you know, big deal networks now want all the Friday the 13th and the Halloween, so they can do their big 30-day Halloween promotion and everything. And so people that are bigger than us, you know, are spending more money, and so there's that factor. Then there's the factor that that some of the movies we want, we can't figure out who owns them. You know, and so you would think, well, that's a good thing because you just put it on and say it's in public domain. No, that's not a good thing, because any corporate lawyer that's at your network will say, no, we're not going to take the chance of being sued. We have to know exactly who owns it, you know, and pay them a fee. Yeah. So there's all kinds of problems, and there's a long list of movies that many of them suggested by Darcy, some that have been suggested by me. And Darcy has done polls of the fans of movies that we want to show. Although, here's something I haven't understood about you guys. It's like, a lot of times we'll get a request, will you please show this movie? I've watched it 30 times. What? You know, it's like, I tend to think it's better to find movies that people have never seen, you know, and promote those, you know. And so the idea of the movie that you've watched 30 times that you want to be on the show is a little bit strange to me.
We want you to talk about our favorite movies.
Okay, well,
We want your take on it.
Okay, but what if my take is wrong?
You're entitled
Or
to
what-
your wrong opinion.
What if my take is, this movie sucks? That's a dangerous thing.
question to wrap it up, and that is, how much of John Bloom is in Joe Bob?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, John Bloom is not as interesting as Joe Bob. I mean, most of my career has been as a writer, and
Yes.
if any of you know writers, I mean, we're not very fascinating people. We spend all day staring at a screen, and so originally, when I first created Joe Bob, I would have him say outrageous things just to be politically incorrect, just things that I didn't even believe. As time went on, there's this thing that you develop, this trust with your audience, that I decided you can't do that. It has to be an exaggerated version of what you do truly believe. And so I stopped doing the intentionally outrageous, politically incorrect jokes, simply because it kind of breaks a connection with the audience. Even if you get a laugh, it breaks the connection with the audience because of what we're doing. We're taking these movies that we love and we're talking about them in an earnest way. And so even though we can be funny about it, it has to be true. And so now I would say Joe Bob is an exaggerated version.
Well, that's
John
not a
Bloom.
bad thing.
Okay.
Right? Well, thank you very much for coming out to Days of the Dead Chicago to come play with us.
Thank you.
We're all very grateful to have a convention and not have a little guest like yourself and Darcy. So thank you.
Yeah.
Woo! Give it up for Joe Bob.
All right, thank you. Nice job.
Thank you.